Today we're going to do our introductory video to a really big concept known as awzan al-fa'l. And this is a huge concept, so we're not going to try to fit too much into each video. We're just going to go bit by bit so that we don't overwhelm you. So what is awzan al-fa'l? Okay, well basically in Arabic, the vast majority of words are derived from trilateral roots. It has a root system, right? And you maybe you figured this out intuitively by just all the vocab words that you know. But we're going to start basically putting all this knowledge into a system, right? And each of these roots can hypothetically, that's key to remember, hypothetically, be placed into 15 verb patterns. But the thing is that there are only really 10 common verb patterns. So in our series of videos on this concept, we're just going to pretty much focus on the 10 main ones. And these patterns are known as awzan. So roots, or judhur, can be put into hypothetically 15 different awzan, or patterns. And just to illustrate this concept, we can look at two words right here that are different, but they're also really similar, right? We have yadros and yudarris. Now, if you listen to me say that, or if you just look at those words, you can tell they're similar because they have the same root, right? Da ra sa, da ra sa. The difference is that they basically just follow a different rhythm or cadence, right? And that's because these words are in two different patterns. And you don't have to worry about this too much right now, but this is pattern 1, and this is in pattern 2. And this will become clear as we move on, right? But before we go on, before we start really putting all this knowledge into a system and looking at it systematically, we have to think about what the root system is predicated on. And it's mostly predicated on the three main things are transitivity, intransitivity, and reflexivity. So what are these things? Transitivity is what you have if a verb takes a direct object. So it's a verb that you can do something to. You can do it to someone or to something. Or it can be done on someone or on something, right? So for example, we have I read a book. You're reading a book, right? It takes a direct object, and the direct object is the book. I walked the dog. In this case, the direct object is the dog, and you're walking the dog. You're doing it to the dog in a way, right? And then next we have intransitive, and this is just if it doesn't take a direct object. So, it could just be I walked, or I read. So in English, they can be used in transitive or intransitive ways, but in Arabic, you'd actually have two separate patterns to express a transitive or intransitive, right? And then, so don't get too overwhelmed by this. This is just to sort of begin to familiarize you with the concept. You don't have to be an expert on this stuff. And then lastly is reflexive, right? And a reflexive verb is a verb that is done by the subject on the sentence only to the subject of the sentence. So an example would be to wash. Hypothetically, you could wash someone else, and that would be transitive, but it can also be used in the reflexive sense if you're washing yourself, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind as we move on. And we look at two verb patterns out of the 10 main ones. And so the first pattern that we want to look at is, we want to look at, a relationship between the second pattern, which is fa'ila, yufa'il, and is transitive on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fifth pattern, which is tafa'ala and yatafa'al, which is often reflexive, right? So again, we want to look at the relationship between pattern 2 and pattern 5. Fa'ala yufa'il and tafa'ala yatafa'il, right? And so let's look at the relationship between these two patterns using the root the jadr, which is root, ذكر, right? And so remember, you can put roots into patterns. And so, when we take the root ذكر and we put it into pattern to, what do we get? We get ذكر يذكر, right? فعل يفعل, ذكر يذكر. And this means to make someone recall, or in other words, to remind them. And if we put this same root into the fifth pattern, it becomes تذكر or يتذكر, and this is reflexive, and it means to make oneself recall something. You're doing it to yourself, right? In other words, to remember something. So again, ذكر يذكر, to make someone else recall something or to remind them. تذكر يتذكر, to make oneself recall or to remember something. And for that, for this video, that's it. We're not going to get too deep into it. In our next video, we'll go over just a couple more examples of the close relationship between pattern 2 and pattern 5. So stay tuned. Ma salama.